I never imagined that the house I had built with my own 2 hands, brick by brick, dream by dream, would be sold behind my back, and by my own daughter. That old white house at the end of Maple Lane wasn't just wood and paint. It was my entire life, my memories, my late husband's laughter, and the echo of my children's first cries. But I suppose life teaches you that the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the ones you raised with love. It began one cold morning in March. I remember the smell of wet earth after a night of rain, and the sound of wind brushing through the half-bloomed cherry trees outside my bedroom window. I was sitting at the breakfast table nursing my tea when my chest tightened. It was as if an invisible hand had clenched around my heart and refused to let go. I tried to call out to my daughter, Lily, but no sound came. Everything after that became a blur. The fall, the sound of porcelain shattering, and then darkness. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the room, and the faint beeping of machines surrounded me. My daughter was sitting beside my bed, scrolling on her phone, pretending to care. "Oh, you're awake," she said flatly, without even looking up. Her tone wasn't relief, it was irritation. I wanted to believe it was stress, maybe fear, but something about her eyes that day felt different, cold, detached, almost like she was waiting for something. The doctors said I'd had a mild heart attack brought on by stress and exhaustion. They wanted to keep me for a few weeks to monitor my condition. I wasn't worried about myself, I was worried about my home. That house had seen decades of joy and pain, and after my husband George passed, it was all I had left of him. Every corner of that place whispered his memory. The old rocking chair on the porch, the dent in the kitchen counter from when he dropped the cast iron skillet, even the creaky stairs that always betrayed us when we tried to sneak down for midnight snacks. I told Lily to keep an eye on the house, to make sure no one came snooping around. She nodded absent-mindedly, still glued to her phone. The days blurred together in the hospital. Nurses came and went, machines beeped, and I watched the world outside my window shift from daylight to dusk. Lily visited, but never stayed long. Always with an excuse, work, errands, or some urgent matter. She'd come in smelling of perfume and new clothes, carrying shopping bags that didn't look like groceries. Sometimes she'd show me photos on her phone, her new shoes, her new hairstyle, the dinner she'd had with friends. It stung a little that she didn't care to ask how I was really feeling, but I told myself maybe it was her way of coping. Then one day, a nurse came into my room with a strange look on her face. "Mrs. Whitaker, your daughter said you're being discharged soon," she said kindly. "What? That can't be right. The doctor said another week at least," I replied. The nurse frowned. "Oh, maybe I misunderstood. She was just filling out some papers earlier. Looked official." My stomach twisted. What papers? Why would Lily be handling hospital documents without telling me? That night, I couldn't sleep. Something in my chest told me something wasn't right. So when Lily came the next morning with her usual fake smile, I asked her directly. "What papers were you signing yesterday?" I asked. Her smile froze. "Just insurance stuff, Mum. You worry too much." But the way her hand trembled as she tucked her hair behind her ear told me there was more. 3 days later, I was discharged early. The doctor seemed surprised but said, "Your daughter insisted," that I'd be more comfortable at home. I wanted to believe her, that she cared enough to bring me home early. But when the hospital cab turned onto Maple Lane, my heart dropped. There was a "for sale" sign on my lawn. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the neighbours were selling their house, not mine. But as we got closer, I saw it. My white fence, freshly painted. My porch swept clean. My rose bushes trimmed. And right there, next to the mailbox, "Sold." I froze. The driver asked if I was okay. I couldn't speak. I just stared at that sign until my vision blurred. My chest felt tight again, and the air refused to enter my lungs. The driver helped me out, and that's when I saw Lily's car in the driveway. and 2 men carrying boxes out of the house. "Hey, what are you doing?" I shouted, my voice cracking. One of them looked startled. "Ma'am, we're moving out the remaining belongings before the handover," he said. "Handover?" I whispered. "This is my home." Lily stepped out then, sunglasses perched on her head, holding a clipboard. "Mom, you're back early," she said, as if she'd been caught sneaking out of class. I stumbled toward her. "What is going on here, Lily? Why is there a sold sign outside my house?" She sighed, exasperated, like a teenager scolded for breaking curfew. "Mom, calm down. I did what needed to be done. We couldn't afford to keep this place anymore." "We?" I gasped. "We? That house was paid off. Your father and I worked our entire lives for it." "Exactly," she snapped. "You had your life. It's time to move on. The house was old, falling apart, and I got a great deal." Her words hit me like knives. Falling apart. That home had been standing strong for 50 years. Stronger than her sense of decency, that's for sure. I felt the world tilt around me. The nurse's warning, the rushed discharge, the fake smiles. It all made sense now. She hadn't brought me home out of love. She'd brought me back to witness what she'd already done. The movers ignored my pleas, continuing to carry out the boxes. I wanted to grab them, to stop them, but my body wouldn't obey. My knees gave out and I fell onto the front steps, staring at the house as if I were watching my own life being erased in front of me. That night, Lily drove me to a small apartment on the edge of town. "You'll be comfortable here," she said coldly, tossing the keys on the counter. "It's easier to manage, and you won't have to worry about maintenance." But I knew better. She wasn't doing this for me. She was doing it for herself. When she left that night, I sat alone in that tiny apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes of what little she'd bothered to save. The hum of the fridge was the only sound in the room. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, an old woman, tired and hollow-eyed, wondering how the daughter she'd loved so fiercely could betray her like this. And then it hit me. Maybe this wasn't sudden. Maybe she'd been planning this for a long time. The first night in that apartment felt like a lifetime compressed into a few hours of silence. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the house. My house. The one George and I built after we got married. The laughter in the kitchen, the creak of the rocking chair, the scent of his aftershave that still lingered faintly on his old coat. All of it now belonged to strangers because my daughter, my own flesh and blood, had sold it as if it were a used piece of furniture. I sat at the small kitchen table, the one with chipped corners, staring at the piles of paperwork she had dumped on me. "Everything's here," she'd said. But it wasn't. The more I looked, the more I realized something was missing. The property deed, the tax documents, the will. Gone. She had taken them. Or destroyed them. I wasn't sure which was worse. The next morning, I gathered what little strength I had left and called the county records office. My voice trembled as I spoke. "I need to confirm the sale of a property, 47 Maple Lane," I said. The woman on the other end was polite, but her tone shifted when she found the file. "Yes, Mrs. Whittaker. The sale was completed last week. The buyer's name is listed as Eleanor Holdings, LLC. "Eleanor?" I whispered. "Who is that?" "I'm not sure, ma'am," she replied, "but the paperwork was signed by your daughter, Lily Whittaker, under power of attorney." My heart sank. Power of attorney? I never gave her that. "Can you check when that was signed?" There was a pause. "It was notarized 3 months ago." 3 months ago. That was before my heart attack, before any of this happened. The realization hit me like a storm. She had planned it all, even before I landed in the hospital. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling so violently that I nearly dropped the receiver. I stared at the peeling paint on the wall, feeling the air leave my lungs. My daughter, the little girl I once rocked to sleep, had forged my name. She had stolen my life right out from under me. Later that afternoon, I decided to visit the house. I told myself I just wanted to see it one more time, to say goodbye. But deep down, I think I wanted answers. Maybe even a confession. The cab driver didn't ask questions. He just watched me from the rear-view mirror as tears silently rolled down my cheeks. When we turned onto Maple Lane again, I almost didn't recognize it. The yard was bare. The roses were gone. The shutters had been repainted a colour I didn't choose, a dull, lifeless grey. The porch light was broken, and there was a sleek black car parked in the driveway. A woman stepped out. She looked younger than Lily, dressed in a tailored coat and sunglasses. When she saw me, her expression faltered, as if she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. "Can I help you?" she asked. "This was my home," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "My daughter sold it. I just wanted to see it one last time." Her expression softened a little. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. We bought it through a company. Everything was handled by an agent named—" She hesitated, checking a paper in her hand. "L. Whitaker." I felt the world tilt again. "She didn't just sell it," I said quietly. "She sold me." The woman looked uncomfortable. "I'm truly sorry. If I'd known—" "It's not your fault," I said, stepping back. My chest ached as I looked at the porch where George and I used to sit every evening. That house had held generations of love, laughter, and tears. Now it was just an address on a contract. When I returned to the apartment, Lily was waiting inside. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling her phone like nothing had happened. "You shouldn't have gone there," she said without looking up. "Why, Lily?" I asked. My voice was shaking but calm. "Why would you do that to me?" She sighed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, don't start, Mum. You wouldn't understand. I needed money and that house was just sitting there. You were in the hospital. I thought it'd be better to sell before things got worse." "Better for who?" I asked bitterly. "For both of us," she snapped. "I'm tired of living in your shadow, tired of watching you cling to that broken past. You think Dad was perfect? He wasn't. He left us with debt you never knew about, and I fixed it. I saved us." "Saved us?" I laughed bitterly. "You didn't save anyone. You sold the only thing that ever held us together." Her face hardened. "You should be grateful, Mum. I took care of everything. You've got a roof over your head, don't you?" It wasn't the words that hurt. It was her tone, cold, hollow, like a stranger's voice. I looked at her and realized I didn't recognize my daughter anymore. Somewhere between her new clothes, her new friends, and her need for money, she'd lost the warmth that once made her my little girl. That night, after she stormed out, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Eleanor Holdings, LLC. I needed to know who was behind it. So the next morning I went to the library and asked for help from a kind young librarian named Sarah. She helped me search public business records. When we typed in the name, my heart stopped. Registered agent, Eleanor Whitaker. Eleanor. My mother's name. Lily's grandmother. The woman who had disowned me decades ago for marrying George. But she'd been dead for nearly 15 years. "What does this mean?" I asked Sarah, my hands trembling. She frowned. "It could be a fake name, ma'am, or a shell company. Sometimes people register under names that can't be traced easily." A shell company. My daughter had used my dead mother's name to hide the sale. That night I couldn't sleep again. Every sound in that apartment, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, sounded like the heartbeat of betrayal. I started piecing it all together. The fake power of attorney, the fake company, the secret papers. Lily hadn't done this alone. Someone had helped her, someone who knew the law, the process, and how to make it look legal. The question was, who? And as I stared out the window at the city lights, I remembered something. A man who used to visit her while I was still in the hospital. Slick hair, gold watch, an expensive suit. She'd said he was just a friend from work. But I remembered the way he'd looked around my home, like he was appraising it. That's when it hit me. Lily hadn't just sold my house, she'd been used. But by who? And for what? I couldn't shake that name, Eleanor Holdings. It haunted me like a ghost whispering from the walls of the home I'd lost. My daughter had forged my name, used my dead mother's identity, and created an entire company to sell the house. But what if she hadn't done it alone? What if someone else had been pulling the strings all along? The image of that man, slicked back hair, sharp jaw, gold watch glinting under the hospital's fluorescent lights, replayed in my mind. I'd seen him twice when I was still bedridden. He never smiled. He always stood near the window, speaking to Lily in hushed tones. She told me his name once. What was it? Daniel. Yes, Daniel. Just a friend from work, she'd said. But even then, I knew better. A mother always knows when her daughter is lying. So, the next morning, I decided to find him. I didn't have much to go on. No last name, no company, no address. But desperation can make an old woman surprisingly resourceful. I called the local realtor who'd handled property sales in our area for decades. Mrs. Ellis had known George and me for years. Her voice was cautious when she picked up. "Margaret? Oh, my dear, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." I swallowed hard. "Mrs. Ellis, do you know anything about the buyer or the man who handled the sale? A man named Daniel?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear her debating whether to tell me the truth. "I shouldn't be saying this, but yes, I've seen him around. He's not a local realtor, more like a property broker. Deals with quick cash sales, foreclosures, and families in trouble." "Families in trouble," I repeated bitterly. "He targeted us." "I think so," she said quietly. "And Margaret, if I were you, I'd be careful. That man doesn't just deal in houses. He deals in secrets." Secrets. That word stuck to my bones like frost. What secrets could my daughter possibly have that she'd sell her own mother's home to hide them? That night, Lily showed up again, unannounced, wearing a fancy coat and heels. "Why are you digging around?" she snapped as soon as she walked through the door. "I got a call today. People are asking questions. You're embarrassing me." "Embarrassing you?" I whispered, staring at her. "Lily, you stole from me. You forged my signature. You destroyed our family's legacy. And now you're worried about your reputation?" She looked away, her jaw tight. "You wouldn't understand. I did it for us." I slammed my cane on the floor. "Stop saying that. For us. You mean for you and that man. Daniel, isn't it?" Her face drained of colour. "How do you know that name?" "Because I'm your mother. I notice things. Who is he, Lily? What does he have over you?" For a moment she looked like that little girl I once knew, the one who used to run barefoot through the garden, chasing butterflies. Her voice softened. "It's not what you think. Daniel helped me when things got bad." "What things?" I pressed, stepping closer. She shook her head. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try me." But she didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her purse and rushed toward the door. "Just stop digging, Mum, please. You'll only make it worse." And then she was gone. After she left, I sat there trembling, trying to piece it together. The lies, the fear in her eyes, the way her hands shook when I said his name. She wasn't just being greedy. She was being controlled, manipulated, maybe even threatened. But by who? And why? The next day, I went to the address listed for Eleanor Holdings, LLC. It was a small office building on the outskirts of town, with tinted glass and a sign that looked too new to belong there. Inside, the air smelled like cologne and fresh ink. A young receptionist looked up and smiled politely. "Can I help you, Ma'am?" "Yes," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "I'm here about Eleanor Holdings. I need to speak with Daniel." Her smile faltered for a split second. "I'm sorry, Ma'am. Mr. Daniel doesn't take unscheduled visitors." "Oh, but he'll want to see me," I said, slipping my old wedding ring into the light so it gleamed. "Tell him it's Margaret Whittaker, the woman whose house he bought under a fake name." The colour drained from her face. "One moment, please," she said, and quickly disappeared into the back office. A minute later, the door opened, and there he was, Daniel himself, tall, polished, his eyes sharp and dark. "Mrs. Whittaker," he said smoothly, "this is unexpected." "Not as unexpected as finding my house sold to your company," I replied. "You stole it." He smiled faintly. "Oh no, Mrs. Whittaker, you sold it. I have the papers." "You forged them," I snapped, "or made my daughter do it." He tilted his head. "Such serious accusations. I assure you, everything was legal." I took a step closer. "Why use my mother's name? Why Eleanor?" That caught him off guard. His smile faded for just a second. "Names are just names," he said quietly. "They make transactions easier." "No," I said. "You chose that name for a reason. You wanted to hurt me." He looked at me for a long time before sighing. "Mrs. Whittaker, you're not as naive as I thought." "What do you mean?" I asked. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Your husband wasn't who you think he was. The debts your daughter mentioned? Real. He owed money to people, dangerous people. I'm just the one who collected." I felt my heart stop. "George? No, he was a good man." Daniel shrugged. "Maybe once, but people do desperate things when they're cornered. He took out a loan years ago against your house, never paid it back. I simply took what was owed." My knees went weak. "You're lying." "Am I?" he said coldly. "Ask your daughter. She found out the truth after his death. She tried to fix it the only way she could." I stood there, shaking, torn between rage and disbelief. My George, my loving, gentle husband, had always promised he'd never leave me burdened. Could he really have hidden something so massive? Daniel handed me a folder. "Take a look. Loan agreements, signatures, everything. You'll see I'm telling the truth." I grabbed it and walked out before he could say another word. My hands were trembling as I flipped it open in the parking lot. Inside were copies of documents with George's signature, dated nearly 20 years ago. Loans, interest rates, collateral, all tied to our home. But one thing didn't make sense. The signature wasn't George's. It was close, eerily close, but I knew every loop, every curve of his handwriting. I'd watched him sign checks for 40 years. Someone had forged his name too. And suddenly, it hit me. This wasn't about George's debts, it was about mine. Someone had been building this trap for years, waiting for me to be weak, waiting for my daughter to be desperate enough to play along. And now they had everything. I sat on that bus ride home, gripping that folder like it held the last threads of my sanity. Every page smelled faintly of ink and deceit. The signatures, the seals, the official stamps, all too neat, too precise. My George had been a carpenter, not a man of documents. He used to sign his name with a shaky hand and a little smiley face next to it, his private joke. But the signatures in those papers were flawless, clinical, deliberate. Someone had copied his hand like a forger tracing over a dead man's ghost. By the time I reached the apartment, the sky had turned grey. The lights from the street below shimmered through the thin curtains, dancing like ghosts across the wall. I sat at the kitchen table, spread the papers before me, and read every line again. And again. My eyes blurred, my heart pounded. None of it made sense. Why would anyone go through so much trouble to take an old woman's home? Then I saw it. On the final page of the file, a small line of fine print. Witnessed and notarized by L. Whitaker. Lily. My own daughter had helped fake her father's signature. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every hour brought another memory clawing back. The day George taught Lily to ride her bike, the laughter when she made pancakes that stuck to the ceiling, the way he'd scoop her up and call her his little miracle. How could she destroy the very man who'd loved her more than life itself? The next morning I made a decision. I needed proof, something solid that could expose Daniel and his lies. I called an old friend of George's, Henry Carter, a retired notary who used to work with him at the mill. Henry was the kind of man who remembered everything, right down to the year someone changed their handwriting style. He agreed to meet me at a cafe downtown. He arrived bundled in his old brown coat, his eyes kind but weary. When I showed him the papers, he frowned immediately. "These aren't George's signatures," he said after a moment. "They're forged." My breath hitched. "You're sure?" "Positive. I notarized plenty of his work documents." The man had a tremor in his right hand, barely noticeable but there. "These signatures are too smooth. Whoever did this practiced." "Could it have been Lily?" I whispered. Henry hesitated, then sighed. "She was always good at copying, wasn't she? I remember when she forged your signature for that field trip form in high school." The world tilted again. It was all spiraling into something darker than I'd imagined. My daughter hadn't just been manipulated, she'd become part of the manipulation. Whether willingly or not, I didn't know. Before I left, Henry leaned in. "Be careful, Margaret. If someone went through this much effort, it's not just about money. There's something else they want." Something else. The phrase rattled in my bones. When I returned home, the apartment door was slightly open. My heart skipped. I stepped inside cautiously. The lights were off, the air heavy with perfume. Lily's perfume. She was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen, clutching something in her hand. "Mom," she whispered, "I didn't know you'd find out so fast." I shut the door, quietly. "So it's true then?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Daniel said it was the only way. He told me if I didn't sell the house, we'd both lose everything. He had proof. He said Dad owed money, and he'd go to the authorities for fraud." "Fraud?" I repeated. "Your father was no criminal." "I know," she sobbed. "But he showed me documents, letters, even photos. He said Dad took money under a fake name to cover gambling debts. I didn't want to believe it, but he said the only way to protect you was to sell the house before they seized it." Her words sliced through me like a blade. "And you never asked me? Never came to me to talk?" She buried her face in her hands. "I was scared. He said if I told you, he'd ruin us both." I sat down across from her, the silence heavy between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then I asked softly, "What did he give you, Lily, for doing it?" She looked up slowly, shame burning in her eyes. "Half the sale money. He said it was my share. I used it to pay off some things, but now it's gone. He disappeared." The tears came again, but this time they weren't from anger. They were from heartbreak. My daughter had sold our home to save me from a lie planted by a man who'd preyed on her fear and my weakness. I reached across the table, took her trembling hands and whispered, "We're going to fix this." She looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're going to find Daniel. We're going to expose what he did. He forged your father's name, and he used you to do it." For the first time in weeks, I saw a spark of hope in her eyes. "You'd really help me, after everything." "You're my daughter," I said softly. "You made mistakes, but you're still mine, and no one hurts my family and gets away with it." That night, I took every paper, every scrap of evidence, and started putting the puzzle together. Addresses, dates, phone numbers. The company, Eleanor Holdings, was just a front. But one of the addresses linked to it, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, was still listed under Daniel's name. So we went there. It was raining when we arrived. The old warehouse loomed like a skeleton against the night sky. The door creaked as we stepped inside, our flashlights slicing through the dust. Piles of boxes, old filing cabinets, and the faint smell of gasoline filled the air. "Mom," Lily whispered, "maybe we should call the police." "Not yet," I said, scanning the room. "We need something solid." And then I saw it, a desk in the corner, covered in stacks of papers. I brushed off the dust and froze. Dozens of property deeds, all in different names, all sold to Eleanor Holdings. Families, old couples, widows. Daniel had been doing this for years, forging documents, creating fake debt, manipulating vulnerable families into selling their homes for a fraction of their worth. Lily gasped. "Oh my God, all these people!" I nodded. We weren't his first victims. And then, footsteps. Heavy, slow, echoing from the back of the warehouse. Lily clutched my arm. "Mum?" "Hide," I whispered. We ducked behind a stack of boxes as the footsteps grew closer. Daniel appeared in the doorway, phone pressed to his ear, his voice calm and cold. "Yes, it's done. The old woman's quiet now. The daughter too. I'll move the next property tomorrow." My blood turned to ice. He thought we were finished, erased. When he walked past us toward the desk, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stood up straight and said, "Not quite, Daniel." He froze. Our eyes met, and for the first time, he looked afraid. The warehouse seemed to hold its breath the moment his name left my lips. Daniel turned, his phone slipping from his hand and clattering onto the floor. For a split second, the mask he always wore, the charm, the control, cracked. His jaw clenched, his eyes darted toward the shadows where Lily hid. "Well," he said finally, his voice calm again but his eyes sharp as glass. "I see you've been busy, Mrs. Whittaker." I took a step forward, the damp concrete cold under my shoes. "You've stolen homes from grieving families, manipulated my daughter, and forged my husband's name. It ends tonight." He smiled faintly, but there was something forced about it. "You're making dangerous claims for someone with a weak heart." "My heart's stronger than you think," I said, "especially when it's broken." He gave a quiet laugh and walked closer. "You have no proof, just papers you stole from private property." "Papers you forged," I shot back. "Every signature, every seal. I know my husband's handwriting, and I know you didn't do this alone. You used my daughter, preyed on her fear." Daniel's expression darkened. "Your daughter came to me. She begged for help. I didn't force her hand. I just gave her a way out." "That's a lie." Lily's voice trembled from behind the crates. She stepped into the light, her eyes red but determined. "You told me Mum was dying. You said the bank would take the house. You said—" "I said what you needed to hear," Daniel interrupted coldly. "You wanted easy money. Don't pretend you were innocent." "Don't you dare talk to her like that," I snapped. "You poisoned her mind." He tilted his head, his tone suddenly quieter. "You think you're the victim here, Margaret. You and your late husband started this. I'm just finishing what he began." I froze. What are you talking about? He smiled, slow and cruel. Your husband wasn't as pure as you believe. The money he borrowed wasn't for gambling or bills. It was for her. He pointed at Lily. A secret college fund, hidden in offshore accounts. But the man he borrowed from died, and the debt passed to me. That's impossible, I whispered. George would never keep secrets, he cut in. You think you knew everything about him? You think he told you about the accident? What accident? Daniel leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. 20 years ago, construction site. A man died. Your husband signed off on faulty equipment. The company paid him to stay quiet. He used that hush money to build your dream house. My mind reeled. No, that's not true. I have the files, Daniel said. Every payment, every receipt. You're living in a house built from blood money, Mrs. Whittaker. You think I'm the villain? I just reclaimed what was never yours to keep. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the world spinning around me. George? My George? Could he really have hidden something like that? The walls of everything I'd ever believed in began to crumble. But then Lily spoke, her voice trembling yet steady. You're lying. You've been lying since the beginning. Daniel turned to her, his voice sharp. Careful, Lily. No, she said, taking a step closer. I checked the dates. I saw the bank transfers. You made them look like Dad's, but they were yours. You forged his name to create the illusion of debt. You needed leverage and you used us. His eyes narrowed. You shouldn't have looked into that. I did, she said, clutching a folder she'd pulled from her coat. And I made copies. His face went white. You what? I sent everything to the police before we came here, she said. If anything happens to us, they'll know exactly where to find you. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick, electric. Then Daniel's calm facade shattered. He lunged forward, grabbing the folder from her hands and throwing it across the floor. Papers scattered like snow. I moved instinctively, stepping between them. Don't touch her, I shouted, my cane swinging up. He grabbed my arm hard, his face inches from mine. You think you've won, old woman? You don't even know the half of it. Then his phone buzzed on the floor. He hesitated, just a second, but it was enough. Lily grabbed a heavy file box and swung it with all her strength. It hit him square in the chest. He stumbled backward, crashing into the desk, knocking over a lamp. Sparks flew as the bulb shattered and the edge of a paper stack caught fire. Run! I screamed. We bolted for the door, smoke already curling toward the ceiling. Daniel shouted something behind us, his voice lost in the chaos. The fire spread fast, the old papers feeding it like dry tinder. We burst into the rain, gasping, coughing, the glow of flames behind us lighting up the dark sky. From the street, we watched the warehouse burn. Fire engines wailed in the distance, their lights slicing through the mist. I could barely stand, my heart pounding, my clothes soaked. Lily wrapped her arm around me, crying. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I turned to her, brushing her hair back from her wet face. You were trying to protect me. He made you believe a lie. That's not your sin. It's his. The firemen arrived minutes later, shouting orders, rushing toward the blaze. I could still see Daniel inside, his figure moving frantically, trying to save something. Maybe the files, maybe himself. But as the flames rose higher, I knew his empire of lies was crumbling with him. By the next morning, the police had called. The warehouse was destroyed. Daniel was gone. Whether he fled or perished, no one could say. But the documents Lily had emailed were enough. The fraud, the shell companies, the forged signatures, it was all there. The investigation dragged on for weeks. Reporters called it a property scam scandal. Dozens of families came forward. Every one of them had lost their homes the same way we had. And yet, through the ashes, a strange peace began to settle in my heart. Lily stayed with me in the little apartment. We cooked together, talked again like we hadn't in years. Sometimes she'd cry at night, whispering apologies she didn't need to make anymore. I would hold her hand and tell her the truth, that love, when tested by fire, either burns away or hardens like steel. Ours had survived. One evening, a letter came in the mail. The government had seized Daniel's assets, including all properties sold under Eleanor Holdings. Among them was 47 Maple Lane. My house. It was mine again. I sat in silence for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. Then I looked at Lily and smiled. Let's go home. When we drove back to Maple Lane, it felt like crossing into another lifetime. The street was the same, the old oak trees bending toward one another, the sound of children playing in the distance, the faint smell of wet grass. Yet everything felt different, as if time had stopped the moment I left that house, and now it was waking again, slowly, painfully, to greet me. The white house stood there, half empty, half alive. The new owners had moved out after the investigation, the paint had peeled again, and the garden had grown wild. I stared through the car window, my heart trembling. "It's still standing," I whispered. "After everything, it's still here." Lily parked the car and turned to me. "Are you sure you're ready, Mum?" I smiled faintly. "I've been ready for 20 years. I just didn't know it." The front door creaked as we stepped inside. Dust floated through the air, illuminated by sunlight that poured through the windows. Every step echoed. The living room was bare now, the walls stripped of the photos that once told our family story. I ran my hand over the fireplace mantel, remembering George's laughter, the smell of Sunday roast, the sound of the old radio humming through the evenings. And yet, beneath all those memories, there was something else. A feeling, a weight. "I can't believe he lied," I said, quietly, my eyes tracing the floorboards. "All those years. I thought I knew him." Lily knelt beside a box near the hearth, opening it gently. "Mum, what if he didn't?" I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She held up an envelope, old and yellowed with age, the words, "For Margaret," written in George's handwriting. My breath caught. "Where did you find that?" "It was hidden behind the drawer in your desk," she said softly. "I found it while I was packing before all of this." My hands shook as I took the letter. The paper was thin, fragile, but his handwriting, that familiar, uneven scrawl, was unmistakable. I opened it slowly, afraid it might crumble in my hands. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to tell you myself. There are things I've kept from you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't want to burden you with the mistakes of my youth. When I was younger, before I met you, I worked on a construction project for a man named Frederick Hale. He was powerful, dangerous, and corrupt. I discovered that the company was cutting corners, using cheap materials, paying off inspectors. I wanted to report it, but Hale found out. One night, there was an accident. A worker died. They blamed me. Hale offered me a deal. Stay quiet, sign the papers, and he'd keep my name out of it. I did what I had to, Margaret. For you. For our family. The money he paid wasn't hush money. It was guilt money. And I used it to buy the only thing that ever mattered to me. A home for you and our daughter. I thought if I could fill it with love, it might cleanse the sin that built it. If you ever hear the name Eleanor Holdings, know this. It's Hale's legacy. He used that name for his shell companies. I thought they died with him, but if someone's using it again, it means the rot never left. Forgive me for the silence. I only wanted peace for you and Lily. If this comes back to haunt you, know that my love for you was real, even if everything else was built on broken ground. Yours always, George. The letter trembled in my hands. I couldn't speak. Every word shattered something inside me and healed something else at the same time. Eleanor Holdings, I whispered. It wasn't random. Lily's voice was barely audible. Daniel must have known about Hale. Maybe he worked for him. I nodded slowly. Or he was Hale's son. The realization hit like lightning. The hatred in Daniel's eyes, his obsession with the house, the name Eleanor. It wasn't about money. It was revenge. He hadn't been collecting a debt. He'd been settling one. The silence that followed was heavy. Only the creak of the house filled the air, that familiar old sound that once comforted me, but now felt like a whisper from the grave. Mom, Lily said softly, do you want to keep it? I looked around. The walls, though bare, still breathed. The ghosts were still here. Not to haunt me, but to remind me of what we'd survived. Yes, I said finally. But not as it was. We'll rebuild it. Together. For the next few months, that's exactly what we did. Every morning we painted the walls anew, scrubbed the floors, and replanted the garden. The neighbours would wave from their porches, whispering about the Whitakers who came back from the ashes. And sometimes, when I'd stand on the porch at dusk, I could almost feel George beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his voice soft as the wind. You did good, Maggie, he'd say in my mind. You found the truth. One afternoon, Lily came running up the path with a letter in her hand. It's from the attorney, she said, breathless. They're closing the case. I opened it slowly. Daniel's fate was finally known. His body had been found weeks after the fire, buried in the debris near the warehouse's back office. They identified him by a burned ID badge, Daniel Hale. George's sins had come full circle. I sat down on the porch steps, the paper fluttering in my hands. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who built my home from guilt had a son who tried to destroy it from vengeance. 2 generations of men consumed by secrets and pride. And yet, it was the women they'd hurt who found the courage to set things right. I looked up at Lily, tears in my eyes. It's over, I whispered. She nodded, kneeling beside me. It's really over. We sat there for a long time in silence, watching the sky turn gold. The wind rustled through the newly planted roses, the same roses George once loved. I could almost hear his laugh, faint but warm, carried on the breeze. But somewhere deep in my heart, I knew this story wasn't just about losing a home. It was about finding one again. Not in walls or rooms, but in forgiveness. It's been a year since we returned to Maple Lane. The seasons have come and gone, repainting the world outside my windows in shades of gold, grey and green again. Sometimes I sit on the porch in the evenings and listen to the wind slide through the old oak branches. And I think of everything that house has seen. Birth, laughter, betrayal, fire, and now, peace. The scars are still there, if you know where to look. The floors creak differently where the boards were replaced. The new paint smells a little too clean. Yet, when the morning sun spills across the kitchen table, it falls exactly where George used to sit reading the paper. I can still hear his voice if I let my mind wander far enough. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's mercy. Lily lives here with me now. She took a job nearby, nothing fancy, just a small accounting office, but it gives her purpose. Each day she comes home smelling of coffee and ink, humming under her breath like she used to when she was little. Sometimes I catch her looking at me with that quiet guilt still flickering in her eyes, and I remind her gently, "We already walked through the fire, darling. We're on the other side now." Forgiveness wasn't an instant thing. It came slowly, the way spring breaks the back of winter, inch by inch, thawing the frost that had lived in my chest. At first I told myself I'd never forgive her for selling the house, for lying, for letting a stranger's lies poison everything we built. But one morning, I watched her kneel in the garden, her hands dirty, tears slipping down her face as she replanted the roses George once tended. And I realized forgiveness isn't a gift you give the other person. It's a way to set yourself free. We rebuilt everything with our own hands. Every nail, every brushstroke felt like a prayer. Some nights we'd stay up late on the porch, sipping tea and telling stories about Dad, about the early days, about how fragile everything seemed once, but how strong it really was. Those nights, laughter returned to the house like an old friend who'd finally found its way back home. The investigation closed quietly. Daniel's death was ruled accidental, the fire deemed electrical. But the files Lily had sent exposed everything: the fraud, the forged documents, the fake shell companies. Families began reclaiming their stolen homes. Letters arrived, thank you notes from people I'd never met, but who had lost everything just like we had. "Your courage saved us," one woman wrote. "You gave us back our lives." I read those letters out loud at the table, and each time Lily cried. One afternoon in early autumn, a man came to the gate. He was older, thin, wearing a worn coat. "Mrs. Whittaker?" he asked. "My name's Henry Carter. I heard you got the house back." I smiled and shook his hand. "Yes, thanks to you." He looked around the yard and nodded approvingly. George would have liked this. He always said this place was his way of saying sorry to the world. That night, I sat by the fireplace with the letter George had written, the one I'd nearly torn apart in anger before realizing it was the only truth left. I read it again, slower this time, and it struck me how much pain people carry quietly, how easily love gets tangled with guilt, and how redemption sometimes arrives in the shape of a second chance. Lily came in quietly, her hair damp from the rain. "You still reading it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I think I'll always read it." She sat beside me and leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you ever wish it had all been different?" I thought about that. Sometimes, but then I look at you, and I see how strong you've become. We lost everything that didn't matter to find what did. We sat there for a long time in silence, the fire crackling softly, the rain tapping at the windows. Outside, the garden glowed under the porch light, the roses shining with dew. It was quiet, not the kind of quiet that hurts, but the kind that heals. The next morning I woke early. The world was still wrapped in mist, and the house was hushed except for the ticking of the clock in the hallway. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the windowsills. I realized something then. Homes aren't alive because of what they're made of. They're alive because of the people who forgive within them. When I reached the porch, I saw Lily standing by the roses, her hands tucked into her sweater. She smiled when she saw me. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I said. The house was whispering again. She laughed softly. "What's it saying this time?" "That it's time to let go of the ghosts," I said, "and to start living again." We stood there together, watching the sun rise over Maple Lane. The light poured through the trees, painting the house gold. The same house that had once been a prison of memories now felt like a promise. I turned to her and said, "When I die someday, don't sell this place. Not for money, not for fear. Let it stay in the family. Let it keep our story." Tears filled her eyes. "I promise, Mum." And then, for the first time in years, I felt something deep and still inside me. The kind of peace that doesn't need words. As I sit here now, writing this story, I can hear the world outside settling into evening again. The kettle is whistling. Lily's humming softly in the kitchen. The roses outside the window are blooming, just like they used to. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can almost hear George's voice from the porch, low and warm. "You brought them home, Maggie." And maybe that's what life really is, a long road of losing and finding, of breaking and mending, of loving even when it hurts. I lost my home once, yes, but in losing it, I found something far greater. I found my daughter again. I found the truth, and I found myself. The house stands quiet now, the evening sun falling across its walls. It doesn't feel haunted anymore. It feels alive. The wind moves through the roses, and I can almost swear I hear them whisper, "Welcome home."